But there is one thing that I really, really hope that many of you at home are saying. And hopefully, I hope you at home are yelling about line 52.
I think I know what you're going with this.
Yeah?
I think I know what you're going. This is one of the things that the block controller did do, right? It gave us that field where we input the IP address in the control panel. And that means that Jimmy Jim, who doesn't know how to write any Lua code, can change the IP address if they get a new device, or if it refreshes, it gets a different, whatever.
Yeah.
Right now, this is all inside the code. If you want to change the IP address, you got to dig through the code, you got to change it there. I don't want people coming into the code and changing it here.
Right. We've all met Little Billy. We don't need Little Billy in our code. This is actually kind of terrifying if you think about it. And to Nate's point, the block controller gave us a really good way of handling that. Namely, it gave us controls. It gave us a place to enter an IP address and a place to enter the port number so that we could make our code, what's that? Configurable. So let's go offline because we are going to add some controls to our script. Come back out to your script and let's add 2 controls. All right, the first one, we're going to call it IP address. And I know, like, Jeff, you always use a prefix. I'm going to come back and put in the prefix, but I want to ask you, what should we configure this control to be? Should IP address be a button? Goodness, no, that would be pretty weird. So definitely not a button. What about a knob? Nope, not a knob. What about an indicator? Ooh, well, there are text indicators, Nate.
But then you can't type into it.
You can't type into it. So that's not what we want either. This is actually the easy one. We are going to make it be a text box, and that's good. So let's give it the prefix txt just to keep the consistency. Okay, I've done all this work to have a consistent naming system. We're going to keep it. Now, what about control 2? Control 2 needs to be the port. All right, so before we name it, let's configure it. What is going to be our port control? Right, button? Pretty obviously not the correct answer. But now, here's the question, okay? Are there any other that are pretty obviously the wrong answer, Nate?
I'm trying to find Coast Guard in here, and that's not an option.
No?
Which is normally what I would be using for port control.
Oh, I see what you did there. It should be a knob. Now, indicator definitely is not the right answer. And there, I bet many of you at home actually came down with, I'm team text. What do you mean team knob? Why a knob? Why not a text? But the answer kind of comes down to this consideration of data validation, which is a thing, and it's kind of important. And we're going to do a nickel's worth of it, and so here we go. Part of the reason to make it a knob instead of a text is, what does a port need to be? It has to be a number. Specifically, it has to be an integer number. You could use a text box, but then you are signing up to do extra work to make sure that what they entered actually is valid information before you try to shove it into the function call, right, inside that method of connect. However, if we make this thing a knob, then we could also configure it to be an integer, and then we could configure it to have the range of from 1 to 65535. A couple of different reasons. One reason is because that's the full range of the 16 bits. It also corresponds to, according to the interwebs, right? ICANN, the people that make the interwebs. These are the range of port numbers. So we are setting it to be the full range of port numbers. But more importantly, what we're doing is we are guaranteeing we are getting the correct kind of answer. It's almost guaranteed to be the wrong port, but at least it's the right kind of data coming in to slide right into our argument of our connect method. It actually is kind of nice from that standpoint. So let's name this thing not control 1. Let's name it KNB port. While you're here, you may also choose to drag these controls out into your design and make them a little bit bigger so that they're a little easier to deal with. But hit go, and then let's fix this code. So the very first thing that we are going to do is we need to fix up line 52 because we just said that we did not want to hard code this in. So let's comment that, and let's underneath it write dev lights connect. And what are we going to connect to? Which IP address? The one that we just configured. Controls.textIPaddress.string. And then what port is it? It is controls.knbport.value. And when you hit save, you will see that, oh no, it doesn't work. My line 54 says to connect on whatever is the dot string of the IP address and whatever is the dot value of the port. But I left my controls blank and the default value of 1. Is that the correct information? It is not. So we shouldn't be surprised that it didn't connect and it didn't work. So let's update that. What is the correct IP address? It is 127.0.0.1. And what is the correct port? It is 5103. Cool, that is the correct information. Let's come back to our script and let's give her a go one more time. And guess what? It's still broken. Mine is still broken, even though I went out and put in the new IP address and port. But think about it. How many times am I ever using the connect method, Nate? I'm only using it the one time.
Oh, you haven't refreshed your code.
I haven't refreshed my code. If I were to hit reload, right, restart my script or go offline and back online, my code would now work perfectly. Okay? But let's think about that. What do I need to do to make it so that when I change my IP address, I reconnect? What does that sound like?
That sounds like an event, man.
It does.
That sounds like someone's got to handle that event.
It sure does. We need to write an event handler for the IP address. We also need to write an event handler for the port. And guess what? Both of them are going to run the same code, which means we need to write a function. Let's write a function called funcEstablishConnection. We're going to write function funcEstablishConnection. It doesn't need any arguments. And because we opened it, we're going to close it. And so let's think for a minute, Nate. I'm going to go ahead and pull this in because we're going to need that guy in just a second. When are we going to want to run funcEstablishConnection? With the event handler. And
when it starts? When it boots?
When it starts.
Yeah.
When it starts,
when
right.
When you're funking it up.
Exactly. Because it would be really sad to have to change the IP address to make it reconnect. That would not be cool. So we want to run it 3 times. We want to run it in the main line, right? So at startup, we want to run it for controls.txt_IP_address.event handler. We're going to make use of your favorite sort of subtle thing. We, instead of using the function version of it, we're going to use the variable version of it. And there we go. We can write our event handler just that simple when the event handler really is that simple. We can simply say, hey, Mr. Event Handler, here you go. Just run this particular function. This is the one that you need. So controls.knobport.event handler. And one more time, just like that. So we're doing pretty good, but we actually should stop for a second and think through what all does funcEstablishConnection need to do? Well, let's take one more trip in the Wayback Machine, and let's think about the way telephones used to work, because we're kind of approximating the way that a telephone works. We are picking up the phone and we are dialing numbers and then sticking it to our ear so that we can talk on the phone and everything. But for all of the kids, before you pick up a phone, or actually if you already have the phone picked up, what do you have to do before you can redial a number, Nate? Do you remember back to the late 1900s? How did it work?
You gotta hang up again.
You've got to hang up the phone before you pick up the phone and dial a new number. Same thing here in our function. We actually need to run dev lights : disconnect. We need to hang up before we dial a new number. What if it was already down? Guess what? You hung up a hung up phone. It's fine. We're simply making sure that we have dropped the connection before we make a connection. Okay? All right. So disconnect is hang up the phone, right? And then we're ready to connect on the phone. So now when I hit save, it works. It works pretty good. Awesome.